Every construction or land contamination project begins with understanding the ground beneath our feet. The ground conditions of a site are a complex system of geology and groundwater. Typically, this comprises different layers of soil and rock of variable thicknesses. These soil and rock materials have characteristics we can accurately define, things like strength, plasticity, composition, consolidation, and weathering. All of these things are relevant to the performance of the strata in engineering applications, and ensuring we have an accurate picture of what is beneath our feet is crucial to ensuring the long-term safety and stability of the structures built above it. Characteristics of the ground can be obtained by in situ tests such as the standard penetration test, but more often they are taken from laboratory tests carried out on the physical soil and rock samples. Water samples should also not be forgotten, as the groundwater chemistry may be aggressive to certain materials such as concrete or may be transporting contaminants. This video will demonstrate the life of a sample and explain why it is so important for ground investigation companies to prioritize good sampling protocols for soil, rock, and water. The journey for a sample starts with the drill crew in the field. From here, the sample moves to a laboratory for testing. The test results are then provided to geotechnical engineers, land contamination specialists, or other geotechnical engineering specialists. They then use the findings from the testing to design geotechnical structures or deliver an assessment of contamination on a site. It seems like a simple process. The driller provides the sample, the lab tests it, the engineers develop their solutions around the results. However, each step is reliant on the original sampling being done correctly and with due care and attention. Crucially, it is the quality of the sample that determines what laboratory tests can be carried out and how reliable the subsequent data and defined characteristics for design purposes are. A typical ground investigation will require the driller to obtain a number of different sample types. There will be samples specifically taken to assess if contamination is present, and then a variety of disturbed and undisturbed geotechnical soil and rock samples. These are taken to determine design parameters. The quality of the samples taken will determine the type of laboratory testing which can be acceptably undertaken on them, and the reliability of the test results obtained. BS-EN ISO 22475 Part 1 provides details of different samplers and in which ground conditions that they should be used. It also provides a quality classification scheme which provides information on what testing can be carried out on various classes of samples. For example, Class 1 samples are of the highest undisturbed quality, which means that all types of laboratory testing can be carried out. On the other hand, Class 5 samples are highly disturbed, which drastically limits the tests that can be completed, meaning they can only be used for general classification. Let's see how these samples are obtained and what happens to them. Meet our team of experts. The key members on site are the drill crews and ground engineering specialists. These team members must work together to ensure that everybody understands the aims of the investigation. The drill crews need to understand what types of samples need to be taken, from which boreholes, and from which depths. The site conditions and location may vary hugely, but the importance of the sample collection remains the same. This importance is a consistent requirement regardless of where the site is or the type of project. The standards should always remain the same. It all starts here. Borehole locations have been identified and sampling requirements have been communicated. At this point, the quality of the data from each and every sample, and subsequently the overall project, is completely dependent upon the skill and care taken by the driller and the drill crew. Right now, they play the single most important role in the process. It is their skill, their knowledge, and their execution that decides if the project will be a success or a wasted opportunity. Of course, there is also the issue of equipment. The quality of the data will also depend upon the sampling equipment and samplers chosen for the project. A good driller is only as good as the tooling and equipment they are asked to work with, after all. Good preparation is the key to not only the efficiency, but also the quality of the sampling activity. This means the drill crew must have mobilised the correct samplers to the borehole location, and that there are suitable and sufficient tubs, bags, liners, boxes, jars, and labels available. It also means that samplers should not be damaged. All cutting shoes must have sharp cutting edges and have no nicks or dents that may compromise the ability to effectively sample the strata. Now, let's take a look at some of the sample types that can be obtained as part of a ground investigation. Often, disturbed samples are required at set depths throughout the borehole and at each change in strata. Small disturbed samples of fine soils, clays, and silts are normally adequate for simple laboratory tests. Although they are classified as disturbed and are only used for classification testing, it is still paramount that all samples are kept in good condition and treated with care and respect. For example, containers such as supermarket sandwich bags should never be used for small disturbed samples, as they cannot maintain the natural water content of the sample within them. Larger disturbed samples are placed in strong plastic bulk bags, and these are often required in coarse soils such as sands and gravels. These samples should contain no less than 10 kilograms of material to ensure that suitable laboratory testing can be carried out. However, when filling the bags, it is important to think about the rest of the team expected to lift and carry these around site. With all disturbed samples, it is really important that if different strata is encountered, that materials from each strata type are kept separate and recorded as separate samples, even if the size of the sample is less than the ideal weights previously mentioned. There are a variety of sample types that are loosely referred to as an undisturbed sample. However, the actual quality of the sample obtained very much depends upon the dimensions of the samplers being used, the materials being sampled, and the skills of the driller. 22475 Part 1 provides clear definitions for what is considered a thick-walled sample or a thin-walled sample. It also provides parameters to help determine the impact of sample quality depending on how the sample is taken. It also further distinguishes between static or pushed samplers and dynamically driven samplers. Examples of thick-walled samplers include window samplers, dynamic liner samplers, and U100s. Thin-walled samples include piston samples, Shelby tubes, and the UT100. Core samples achieved through rotary coring and sonic drilling can vary wildly in terms of quality, and it is as much dependent on their treatment post-drilling as it is about the skill level of the driller or the method of drilling. A driller can use the best equipment on the market and have 25 years experience, but if the recovered core is slammed into core boxes, uncapped and unprotected from the elements, they may as well have not bothered. Equally, a newly qualified driller can take all the care in the world, but if their equipment and tooling is subpar, the quality of sample is going to suffer. Samples obtained using triple tube coring barrels can obtain high quality Class 1 samples from both soil and rock. To maintain this sample quality, these cores must be placed in suitable core boxes, sealed and labelled accordingly. More details on core handling can be found in the BDA core handling training video available on the BDA YouTube channel. Environmental samples are often taken for chemical analysis, which may be for aggressive ground, commonly known as BRESD1 testing. More typically, environmental samples are used to determine the presence and concentration of contaminants in the ground. These samples have to be taken very quickly, stored appropriately, and transported to the analytical laboratory, normally at the end of each working day. The groundwater chemistry across sites can be very important when assessing land quality and looking for potential contamination. However, in certain parts of the UK, the groundwater chemistry can be aggressive, which can lead to adverse chemical reactions with concrete and other buried structures. Where water has been struck, a representative sample of at least 1 litre should be obtained either by the driller during drilling or from installations upon completion of the borehole. Where more than one groundwater strike is observed, each one should be sampled separately. Now we've looked at what sample types can be taken and a few of their specific intricacies, we also need to consider the importance of handling and preserving the samples post-collection. After retrieval from the borehole, the sampling equipment has to be carefully separated from the rest of the drilling assembly and the sample removed. Whether it is a sample of soil or water, it should always be placed into an appropriate container that is sealable in order to maintain the conditions of the sample. When it comes to laboratory testing of the samples, if they have been removed from their original environment and not contained in a sealed environment, changes in the sample's makeup can occur that fundamentally alter the results obtainable by the laboratory. So, if samples are taken but not preserved appropriately, they could deteriorate and become unusable. Once the sample has been retrieved and sealed, it must also be labelled correctly and the sample details must be recorded on the driller's log. The sample itself must carry more than one means of identification so that the sample can still be identified if one label is damaged. The label should be marked with indelible ink and be sufficiently robust to withstand the effects of its environment and the transport of the sample. If the sample is of potentially contaminated material or may contain hazardous substances, then the label should carry a warning to that effect, as shown here by the use of a coloured label. Correct labelling is vitally important to establish a chain of custody. This approach can then be used to document the transportation of the sample between the site and the nominated laboratory. The BDA has an extensive guide to correct labelling available on their website. Samples should be adequately stored and packed ready for transportation, as improper care can lead to further deterioration and disturbance. Samples must not be allowed to roll around in the back of pickups or vans or left in the vehicles overnight. Project managers and site supervisors must have an appropriate storage facility on site for all types of sample which may require refrigeration for environmental samples. Samples should be segregated appropriately and maintained in cool conditions. 22475 Part 1 and the UK Specification for Ground Investigations requires these storage and transportation conditions to be between 5 and 25 degrees Celsius for geotechnical soil samples and between 4 and 12 degrees Celsius for water samples. Environmental samples often require refrigeration between 2 and 6 degrees Celsius. This may mean that at certain times of the year, metal storage containers will not be suitable as the internal temperature can easily exceed 25 degrees Celsius in summer if not adequately vented or cooled. They can also get very cold in the winter. Samples must not be left outside or in unheated facilities in winter when temperatures may drop to around freezing. There must be a clear record of all samples taken and where each sample is stored. When samples are moved off-site or transferred to laboratory facilities, this must be fully documented within a chain of custody. Now all of the hard work obtaining the samples has been completed on site, it's time to see exactly how the samples can be put to good use for testing purposes. At the laboratory, the sample is booked into the system whilst maintaining the same care and attention to its integrity that the site team gave it. This care and attention has to be in place for the entirety of the storage period as well. Once the schedule has been received for the samples, testing can then start with samples transferred from the store into the laboratory. The correct sample can only be established if the labelling has been completed correctly and accurately. At this point, the samples are processed depending on the testing required. The testing scheduled on individual samples relates specifically to the type of sample presented to the lab. Again, it is important to stress that the accuracy of the outcome of any laboratory test is only as good as the quality of the sample the test is being undertaken on. Disturbed samples put forward for testing allow for classification tests, such as water content or liquid and plastic limit tests for silts and clays. Particle size distribution can be carried out on sands and gravels to provide an assessment of general material characteristics and soil behaviour. Undisturbed samples allow for consolidation testing, and triaxial tests can also typically be carried out. These can provide specific parameters such as settlement and strength. With all of these tests, whether utilising disturbed or undisturbed samples, the representativeness and reliability of the results are totally reliant on the quality of the sample and how it has been looked after up until it is tested. If a sample has not been cared for correctly, the results of its testing cannot be reliably called upon for engineering design. That would be a lot of work, money, and effort, all for very little return in terms of accurate design parameters. After completion of the testing, the results are typically entered into geotechnical database software or other laboratory information management systems, which facilitate data capture and the reporting process. The samples recovered from the ground investigation are retained for a certain duration, normally 28 days after submission of the final report. Once testing is complete, however, and this period of time has elapsed, samples must be disposed of responsibly. The disposal adheres to environmental regulations, and the disposal process must be conducted in a safe and sustainable manner. The test results derived from the samples obtained during the ground investigation give the ground engineering specialists a valuable insight into understanding how the soil or rock material is likely to perform under various conditions. The laboratory processes and sample quality are fundamentally important to the geotechnical design or development of the site. These insights are crucial for effective and safe design as part of the construction process and the impact of land contamination. Samples are critically important to this process and understanding. From field to laboratory, every step of a sample's journey is essential. It ensures that designers have relevant information relating to the engineering composition of the materials that form the subsurface geological sequence, commonly referred to as the ground model. Essentially, assisting in bringing clarity to a complex system, and therefore allowing structures to be built safely, effectively, and economically, as well as the assessment of land quality and any required remediation. The better quality the sample, and the more care that is taken to protect and maintain it before testing, the better quality the data, and the more accurate the solution can be. Better samples, better data, better solutions. But it all starts with the drilling team on site. This is the science beneath our feet, the unforeseen foundation of every successful project. This is the life of a sample. Trust the experts. Contact the British Drilling Association to learn more about our membership and our wider input into this industry.